Hello, this is Beline Carlson. I am a 6 through 12 secondary generalist at Nicolaya School, which means that I teach all the kids K-12 depending on what comes up. I am making this video for ASTE 2022 Crowdsource, and this video's topic is on universal design for learning. All of my resources are on this site, and I will link the site into the description of the video. You will find on the site the slide deck for the actual presentation, but hopefully I can get through the meat of the information within the next 15 minutes. So the objective of this presentation is that you as an educator are going to discover at least 3 ways to increase universal design for learning in your classroom. And the reason why we want to do this is because what works best for special needs kids is what works best for all kids, because we're all diverse learners and there is no such thing as average, which I will move on to explain in just a minute. If you are able to figure out ways to integrate UDL into your classroom, you are going to see an increase in student engagement and success. So UDL is this concept. It's a built-in accommodation and modification to meet the needs of diverse learners. There's a YouTube video that's linked here. That's pretty cool and does a really good job of explaining it. It's a concept that came out of architecture, universal design. And it's the idea that if you integrate, think about who the users are. Think about all the different kinds of users that you have that are using a public space or using a street corner, or using a library or a hospital. And you build in those accommodations and modifications for like a wheelchair ramp and breastfeeding room and family bathrooms, things like that, then you're going to make the environment more pleasant and usable and friendly for everyone. And you should think about that as you are building up the architecture from the foundation up. And it's the same thing for education. So again, why we need to do this is this concept of average is a myth. And I really like these two infographics that explain that. My son particularly is an interesting case where, if you look at his IEP and you look at his test results when he was diagnosed with autism, you see that he has an IQ of 108, which is average. However, he has a fluid reasoning skills. His fluid reasoning is in the 98th percentile, and his vocabulary and his comprehension are in the high 80s. So his literacy and his tracking and short-term like working memory were really low. And at the time he took the test, he was functionally illiterate, basically illiterate. He was a little guy when that happened. So is he average? And if you treated him as an average student, would you be doing him justice when he has such a high reasoning and comprehension and vocabulary? And like him, like every other student, that average score, or whatever that average score is, or that concept of average, isn't taking into account all of these different parts of cognition and learning that each individual person has. It's just all over the place, or it can be. And then one student who has a graph that looks like this, you compare these two students. One has a graph like that, the other one has a graph like this. Like you're trying to shoot towards the center with the materials that you use in the classroom, but the center doesn't really exist. There's a great video here. It's on my website about the myth of the average and how the Air Force kind of figured it out, and how they had to modify their fighter planes in order to take this concept into account. Highly recommend you take the time to come back and watch that video. So the CAST organization started off as technology in learning in order to promote these universal design concepts in classrooms, public school classrooms. They have this amazing interactive, what do you call this? An interactive infograph on their webpage, that all of these different things you can just click into, and they are loaded with different strategies that you can just immediately implement. And all of their stuff is research based. They talk about different parts of the brain that learning act, like that you engage when you are learning something, like engagement and representation, action and expression. It's the three broad aspects of learning and showing what you know, and they help you can come up with these different strategies. This is a lot. Like I've spent hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours on this website. I do recommend that you get into it. I do recommend that you go to my website and like click over there and check it out, because it has a ton of resources. But if you don't have time for that, my recommendation for you is to go to my resources on my website. And the first thing that you need to think about is to focus on the standards. So go to the Alaska State Standards or go to your West District Standards and go standard by standard. Like I know that Anchorage School District, like you're required to be on the same page at the same time, like going through whatever the materials are. Hopefully not all the school districts in Alaska are like that, but even if you do have to do that, try to look deeper from whatever the materials say and look into what the standards are. And then ask yourself, like, how can I be flexible? Like, how can I give students the opportunity to say, like maybe I don't want to fill out a worksheet in order to prove to you that I can add one digit numbers. Maybe I would like to play this game. And that's another thing, gamify everything that you can. So look at the standards and then go from there. So I have a UDL planning template. You can click on this button and it'll force a copy. It'll make you force you to make a copy of the document, and then you can use that. And then I also have a learning resource idea. And so this document over here, which you can see, and if you click on this link, then you'll be a viewer on it, or you can make a forced copy and then you can add to it yourself and manipulate these different ideas. So if you were going to be participating in my workshop, you would be working alone or in groups to find a standard, fill out a copy of the lesson plan template, create a 1-point rubric, which I give you directions for in the slide deck. You can find directions on how to make a 1-point rubric. And then to describe student success, and then think about ways that you can integrate these UDL concepts in here. So I have this little slideshow that this was a PD that we did on in the Kenai Peninsula Borough School District and amongst our champs. And so I wanted to, give some strategies and give ways of taking sort of putting standards together in order to create projects that would give students an opportunity to integrate flexible tools and bring in student choice. So the first one was an easy one, which I'm sure every teacher's ever thought about, as character development plus expository essay. And then I have like a 1-point rubric. So character development, and the standard is, and success is that a student can clearly describe the changes in character using evidence from the text. And then expository essay is that a student introduces and defends a clear thesis. And I added perfect grammar and spelling in there because I expect all of my students to turn things in with perfect grammar and spelling because they're using tech tools and there's no reason why they shouldn't. Then there's the history content and creating a timeline. So I have all of these tools here on how a student might create an interactive timeline in order to talk about the Revolutionary War or events leading up to the Revolutionary War. And then here's some science content where they're talking about the functions of plant cells and organelles. And then I have tools linked here, and they're creating an interactive infographic. And here's even some math stuff. So a student can consistently solve quadratic equations through factoring and the use of a quadratic equation. And that is a math standard. And you can have all of these different like video makers and whiteboard makers where a student could create a screencast like that, walking people through the process of how to solve those problems, which would show the teacher that they know how to do that. So I like this meme. 90s teachers, you weren't always going to have a calculator in your pocket. It's like, really? Anyway, gamify everything. That's one of the strategies in here. This was in WordWall. You can click on this and play like a matchup memory game. Some fun things you can embed old MS-DOS type stuff into your websites or your LMS for students to play with. You want to be always focusing on the standard. You always want to use backwards design to figure out what student success looks like. And then after that, you want to give the students as much choice and agency as possible. Students who are more engaged in their learning are going to be, students have more agency in their learning are going to be more engaged. If they can be the ones who control what they create, how they get the information, how they show what they know, if they're the ones who are going to be on top of that, then they're going to take ownership over their own learning, and they're going to be more successful that way. And you're teaching them lifelong skills. So you're not teaching them just the quadratic equation. You're also teaching them how to be learners and how to be producers of information and not just consumers. And that's a life skill. That's something that we all have to do. Yes, please look for the link to this website and the presentation slides and all of the resources in the description of the video, and have a delightful afternoon.